Very well. So first of all, thanks for having me over. I think this is the first time we're actually talking about board of directors and its role within the context of game developers. So it's a super exciting topic to be covering here. And a couple of things about my background. I started working within the industry really in 1997 when we founded a company called FutureMark together with Remedy. We took Remedy's technology and started to create benchmark software within the company. And the company is still around. It's distributed more than 100 million benchmark softwares within its niche. It is the global leader, which is kind of cool, but it's a very small niche, unfortunately. So much about that. With regard to board of directors, with FutureMark, I've been on board of directors for 14 years. I've also been on board of directors of Hybrid Graphics, a few other startups in Finland, R5 Vision, companies that have been sold by now. So I do have limited experience in the topic. Unfortunately, in Finland, we don't really have professional people working on just board of directors for game companies. So perhaps Petteri Koponen is the highest authority in that field right now. But I'll try to cover the basics. We'll talk about different life cycle, how the role of the board is changing as the company grows, and that kind of things. But before that, let's take a few questions. First of all, is there anyone who's sitting on board of directors of their own company? Excellent. So why does the board matter? Teemu, why is it important?
Keeping investors happy.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. Any other answers? Guys, Jukka? What's the big deal about board?
I think that's the only right now.
Is there any positive experiences with regard to the company's operation, or is it all negative, just stuff that oh my God, we need all this documentation for investors, this is kind of killing us?
Long-term strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on that.
Good.
Outside view.
Outside view, yeah. Any other thoughts? Why is the work that's done in board of directors in any way relevant to game companies? Any thoughts? Takers? Tiina, you have experience on this. And you're laughing.
It can be relevant. It rarely is, unfortunately. So it requires also clever plan, in my opinion, who's in the board that has something to give.
Totally. I truly agree. The board of directors, it can be a major significant resource that helps the company grow. It can also be a lot of other things. Especially if sometimes it feels like the board of directors, the work down there, lives a life of its own that's very far and removed from the actual operations of the company. And trying to manage those well can be hard. But let's go through the basics. So the things we're going to cover, fundamentals, just the basics. It's surprising how little typically people working in the boards, do not necessarily, especially in startups, know even the basics of corporate law and what they're actually responsible for when they're sitting on those boards. Then I'll cover a few things about what would be a good board of director, how would you build it, what kind of things you'd need. And then the last topic is going to be more around things change. When you're a 5-person company, the work that you do with the board is totally different from that the work that you're going to be doing when the company's grown to more than 100 people. So, the fundamentals. The shareholders appoint the board of directors. Board of directors appoints the CEO. CEO reports to the board. It's typically monthly, done monthly in small companies. If you have international investors, you may just have 4 quarterly meetings. It's something between a monthly and quarterly. They are always set separately, decided by the board. The one thing that's not required by legislation is for the board to actually approve the company strategy as well as budgets. But typically, especially when investors get on board, they do want to take approval rights to the board, and that's something that's agreed separately when investors join the fund. Apologies for the fact that the next legal definition is in Finnish. But this is from osakeyhtiölaki. And if you're sitting on board of directors, take 15 minutes and just read through the important bits of osakeyhtiölaki. It's it can be very important 15 minutes. But what it says in practice is that if you are sitting on board of directors, then you are responsible for company's administration as well as financials. And there's 3 principles that you have to abide with: making sure that the company has adequate equity and capital, making sure that the company is treating its shareholders equally in order to generate profits, and then you have to be prudent and manage the company well. This feels very high level, like johdon huolellisuus ja lojaliteettivelvollisuus. When you're sitting on the board, you have to be prudent. What's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal. Really, the point is that if you're sitting on board, you personally as board members are legally liable for any mistakes that happen or any issues that may happen within the company's operations. So this really does mean that if the company goes bankrupt and oh my God, there's $500,000 in taxes that we forgot to pay, then you as the board member will foot that bill. It's your personal liability, and that's something that not a lot of people realize. So the perception around, hey, awesome, I got involved with a board of a startup, the perception oftentimes is that that's really cool and that's exciting, but it's also good to understand that there is a real responsibility and downside related to that. If something does go wrong, if there's lawsuits, if people are mistreated within the company, ultimately the board is responsible. And hey, I didn't know, we'll never cut it. Just as with any legal issue, if it's the responsibility of the board to find out. Now, anyone who's been sitting on the board of directors actually knows that it's very hard to find out what's really going on with the company. You have 2 hours a month, which is never going to cut it, really. So, but there has to be a lot of trust related to, if you do join a board of a company, you have to trust, you have to have a high level of trust with regard to the people that manage that company. Add into the fact that startups typically never pay for their board members. Normal compensation is driven by equity. You may get a % of a startup stock or something similar. And then you start to realize why it's hard to find very high caliber board members. What about the work in practice? For a startup, of course, appointing the CEO is a very, very big deal, but for a startup, it's almost always the other way around. It's actually the CEO who hires the board and attracts the board members. Especially after the financing kicks in, then sitting down once a year, going through the company strategy and having some kind of milestones to follow up on that strategy is very big part of the work done in the board. Making sure that the company has a clear direction and then following up on that is important. Then, of course, a very important thing for the people sitting on board of directors, effectively they're the people who support the CEO. Anyone who's run their own company knows that when you're working as the CEO, that's a lonely place. There's not that many people to call to when something hits the fan, when there's issues that need to be sorted out, conflicts within the company. The CEO is ultimately typically very alone. And the board of directors, especially if it's an external board of directors, is the part that the CEO can turn to and go, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this HR conflict or whatnot. And it's oftentimes the only external source that the CEO can turn to. So that's really important. The last thing, of course, is exceptions. And if you stay on different board of directors for long enough, you know that it's pretty much always exceptions. So it can be different projects. It can be, hey, we need a plan for equity. We need to give our key people 10% in shareholders. We need to find some kind of mechanisms for that. But typically, that's where board of directors gets involved, helps the company to create equity-based compensations. It may be, oh my God, our CEO just got burnt out. We need to find a new CEO. That's an example of that we went through with one of the companies I was involved with. We actually had to find 3 CEOs during the year because we lost the second one too. But it can be really different kind of exceptions related to anything done with the company. Financing rounds, the offers to buy people, so on. Well, by the way, if there's any questions, just feel free to fire at any time during the presentation. We can also talk later, but all questions are very welcome.
Do board members usually always own part of the company, or are there people just working for a salary?
It depends. Typically, I'd say in almost, because there's no real professional board members, especially in the world of gaming in Finland, typically always there's equity base or an investment has taken place. Very normal case would be angels. The bullet point number 3. The best way to attract people to the company is to have them put some of their own money into it and then join the board of directors. With FutureMark, for example, back in the late 90s. Yes, indeed. Well said. With FutureMark, back in the late 90s, we got really lucky, and Arturi Tarjanne, the partner who later founded Nexit Ventures, was our consultant. He was our first angel. He brought with him Risto Siilasmaa, who was even at the time very well known in Finland. He invested his own money into the company and then took over the responsibilities of the chairman of the board. So there was, like, Risto's net worth was in Finmarks at the time, 14 billion Finmarks, so there wasn't really significant meaningful money that we could pay for the work.
But
So
in
it
the
was all
game
equity
company
based.
boards, currently, most of them have invested in the company somehow.
One way or another, yes. But a normal way would be that people invest something into the company, and that's the upside that they receive, or then they get an option package or some kind of equity-based compensation package at the board. Especially in the early stages, it's very much about personal chemistry, surprisingly much. This is before the investors come in. Who'd like to work with whom? It's business angels typically always get excited about something, and when they fall in love with different companies and cases, then that's really the driver. Not they throw some money in just because they want to participate, but really it's the entrepreneurs that they're excited about, and that's the driving factor. And again, because of the legal liabilities, it is relatively hard to find good board members. So a good starting point typically would be to invite people to the advisory board, where there's no legal implications, and start working with them. And if they get more excited about the case, then see whether you could get them excited about joining to the board themselves. So what's a good board of directors like then? Well, first of all, in a good board of directors, there's a number of different roles. And good boards, by the way, they do challenge themselves. They sit down once a year and talk about, hey, what do we need in our board? What are the roles that we're filling well? Are there gaps that we have? How do we manage those gaps? So really, it's about finding the right kind of mix for your particular company. The role of the chairman is always the most important one. Chairman ultimately is responsible for the board itself. So it's the chairman. It's very hard for the CEO to manage the board upwards. So if there are passive people within the board, if there are wrong kind of talent in the board, so on, typically the CEO is the one who ends up managing that upwards. But in perfect world, you'd have the chairman who really would take responsibility for the way that the board itself works. And if there are conflicts within the board, if there are different, and typically, by the way, there oftentimes is conflicts within the board, then chairman ultimately should be the go-to guy in terms of those conflicts. Then you should always have a dynamo within the board. If the board meetings are passive, if everyone just reads through their notes and looks at their feed, then it's less than useful. So someone should challenge the company. Most of the times, the investors are the ones that drive the company forward and really want to see more aggressive growth plans and more ambitious goals. if you do have a dynamo, it would be kind of useful to have someone to do grounding on those ideas as well. As Tina mentioned and as was discussed in the beginning, sometimes the board of directors, the work that they do lives a life of their own. And having a voice of reason, maybe one of the founders, maybe the CTO or some different kind of role, who every now and then says, hey, that's an awesome idea, but that's totally unrealistic this year. Let's talk about that 3 years down the road when we've done X, Y, and Z. That's really important. Any board needs to have at least one expert who knows what the company really is doing in an operational sense. It's a scary idea if you don't have any experts involved in the board work. Because board members should be active, they should communicate with themselves, there should be a discussion ring going on with the board members themselves, and if none of them have a clue about what the company's operations really are, then again, reality and business plans can live lives of their own. Investors, typically absolutely critical for startups. The one challenge with the investors is that they're looking. They made their commitments to their LPs. They're looking to return the funds that they've invested into your company. So sometimes it can be like a broken record. The board meeting after meeting, year after year, the investor is sitting at the table going like, we need to look at the exit. We need to have an exit plan. When do we exit? How do we exit? When can we sell the company? And that can be taxing over time. Then again, it can be very healthy as well. It can be a force that drives the company forward and really pushes the company towards eventually realizing value. Was there a question? Or nope, cool. So I do like it depends what your objectives are for your company. If you're in it for the love of the game, if it's Legend of Grimrock or the Frogmind kind of case where there's just 3 or 4 guys who are absolutely passionate about creating the best kind of games they can, and there's ultimately their plan is to never sell the company and stick around for the next 50 years doing games, then investors probably won't add a lot of value. If, on the other hand, you want to do something like Rovio or Supersa and have a very high growth curve, or what Grand Crew is doing right now, then investors do add a lot of value and they push you into the right direction. Again, it is just something to be cautious of, though. Especially 10 years ago when we had the internet boom, I went to the board meetings in those years where investors were giving me a hard time that we were burning less than $1 million Finmarks a month, and that we really should just increase our burn rate. And why don't we have courage to really go after the internet space and conquer the world? Because other companies in their portfolio were burning so much more money, and we just don't. Why didn't we have the balls for that? And then obviously the internet boom happened, and we needed to change our business plan slightly or adjust it. So a word of caution for the investors. Right now they're all in free-to-play mode, which is a good thing because free-to-play has been proven to be working, and it's pretty exciting. But then again, when things change, they can change quickly, and just remember that ultimately you are responsible as the CEO of the company. You're responsible for company's operations, and the board. And as the CEO, even if the board wants something, if the investors want an exit in 3 years, you have different responsibilities as the CEO, and just look after those responsibilities. A practical thing: how does a good board of directors work? Funnily enough, I read a lot of VC and related literature over the last year or so, and there's separate chapters on when you join an investment bank, then what are the expectations for the board work that you have. One thing that the VCs themselves constantly underscore is something surprisingly simple. Be prepared. Whenever you go into a board meeting, make sure that you've read all the materials. Typically, board reports are filed maybe 5 to 7 days before the meeting. Make sure you've read those reports when you show up. Make sure you know what the heck's going on before the meeting. It feels obvious, but I've been in a lot of board meetings where people haven't actually read the material, where they're fumbling with their phone and really not available even if they're in person. So it's important to make sure that you respect the companies that you work with enough to make the effort to be proactively up to speed with everything. Normally, typically, you stay in touch with other board members, you stay in touch with the CEO a few times a month. You don't get too hands-on. You make sure that you may talk with other people in the company, but you make sure that you'll never take an operative stand or participate in, especially people who have been founders of the company or actively responsible for the company, when they're working in the board of directors and when they leave the company's operations but stay on the board, it's very easy for them to log back into the operation mode. Hey, we really should get that product launched out soon, or what if you'd look this kind of angle? And then you end up sidestepping the CEO and bad things happen from that. The good board of directors have a very clear yearly agenda. There's January meeting is our financial kickoff meeting. February, we'll follow up on financials. Then in March, we'll do a strategy review. Then April, we'll go through the product roadmap and so on. The different topics for different board meetings. So maybe about half of the board meeting should be the business as usual, run through the operations of the company on a high level. The other half then should be some kind of specific focus area that you go in. And then, of course, the readiness to commit to different projects when required. Again, if key people leave the company, if there's hey, half of our management team just quit, then typically the board members get involved. Or someone in Asia just came through with a term sheet. They want to buy our company. How do we deal with this kind of opportunity? And it can be both good and bad. But again, the one thing to underscore is, if the board members do not make the extra effort, especially in financial situations, if you get a US-based investor, then by definition, your shareholder agreement, for example, will be more than 100 pages long. Now, all the people, the investors that are sitting on the board of directors, if you want to take any action with equity, if you want to take any, if there are issues, financial issues that need to be dealt with, they need to be up to speed with those agreements. They need to understand how these agreements work in context to the previous agreements that you've done. Even in Finland, the shareholder agreements can be 50 pages or 70 pages long. And the worst thing that you have is a board where everyone goes, hey, we need to get these options out there. Well, I don't really know how that's going to be influencing our agreements. So can we come back to that next month and the month after that and so on. So just being up to speed with all of the things is sometimes complicated. Really, the operative management is looking after things that are taking place this year, in the next month, in the next quarter, in the next year. The board should look for things from the scale of what happens in the next 3 years, what happens in the next 5 years. Just 1 to 3 years is probably good time horizon for the work that's done in the board. And especially when you're hands-on managing your own companies, like you guys know, it's very easy to get lost in the middle of the action. There's so many things happening. It's so exciting. You're living this adrenaline-filled startup life. And you don't oftentimes stop and reflect on, hey, what about 2015? What about 2017? There's very little reflection, time and energy left for that kind of reflection. So really, board meetings should be the place where you sit down and just go through the high-level plan, maybe once a month, maybe more often. Typically, a board would review financial, sales and marketing, R&D, just all these things in a board meeting, and just follow up whether you're tracking the plan. One last thing, related to how a good board works, and then we'll move forward to the final phase. But especially in cases where founders are board members, there's often misunderstandings and conflict of what does it mean to own shares? What's the difference between a shareholder's rights and where those should be used? What about the board of directors? When should they use wield the power that they have, if you will? And then what about the CEO and the management team? There can be situations where a real-life example, let's say 2 of the founders together own more than 50% of the shares. They have the right to fire the CEO. Well, they don't have the right to fire the CEO. They have the right to fire the board, who has the authority then to fire the CEO. And let's say a startup goes through first 5-7 years without conflict, and then there's a major conflict where the founders would want to go into one direction, the management, the investors, for example, would want to go into another direction. That's where situations arise when there may be very tough discussions around the, hey, we own more than 50% of the company. Of course, everyone needs to do as we want because we can fire the CEO. Well, that's a huge mistake. So you should never mix up the operative things related to company's operations with the shareholder rights or the board's authority. The worst thing that can happen is that the board members start to walk the floor and go to a graphics designer going like, I don't like that green, it has to be red because I'm a member of the board. That should never happen, and evil things happen when people get involved. The people who work professionally in the board are very careful to avoid the kind of situation. And sometimes it may be hard. If you have operative responsibilities and you're sitting on the board, it's hard to create a distinction between these two. But as a board member, especially you guys that are in both roles, you need to make sure that anytime you take a stand for something, you do it. You make it very clear that it's because you have a certain position in the management, and that's why you're driving certain things through the company, not because you're board members. So it can be easily misused. And shareholders really don't have a lot of rights. There's a yearly shareholder meeting where they approve the board, and the board appoints the CEO. But if you go around your company going like, well, you guys need to do what I say because I own 20% of the shares, then that's absolutely totally wrong. And a lot of this happens. There's a lot of cases where small companies have grown. I'm one of the founders. I own 30% of the shares. You guys should do as I say. No, really you shouldn't. The shareholder rights are something to be used in the shareholder meeting, nowhere else. And if you don't want to fire the CEO, then those are the only rights that you have as a shareholder. So really you shouldn't get involved in the operative side of things. And of course, in many companies, you have infinite loops, like Lasse, especially early on, Lasse Seppänen, who you're working for, who's the CEO of the company, is also reporting to you as a board member, and that kind of infinite loops are fun to manage in many situations. Eventually, as the company grows, my piece of advice will be get rid of those infinite loops as soon as possible because they create confusion. They can work for years, but then if there's a conflict, then those infinite loops are complicated. So careful with those. The last thing, how do things change? Well, you guys have a lot of experience about the early stage, the 5-10 people, the 15 people. I guess my advice would be within the early stage, just keep it as lean as possible. Try not to waste time and energy on lengthy board reports. Don't write 10, 20-page board reports. 1 page, 2 pages should be enough. Here's our cash, here's our strategy, the key things that we're looking. This is what we're going to be launching in the next 6 months, and that's pretty much it. Being able to attract investors like you guys did, just absolutely awesome. Gives you fantastic board members as well. Before the investors, really, it's the passion of the board member itself. That's typically the driving role. Things have to click in place. People have to be excited about working with this or that person. Especially early on, by the way, the very talented people are attracted to working with very talented people. So board is an excellent way of, if you get one high visibility board member, typically 2 or 3 other almost as high visibility or similar members would like to join the board just because they get to work with X, Y, and Z. With Remedy, for example, we had, when Aki Järvilehto was running Rovio's Angry Birds back in the day, Ilkka Paananen joined the Remedy's board of directors because one of the reasons, it wasn't the reason, but one of the reasons was certainly the fact that there were interesting people in the board of directors at Remedy, and Ilkka was excited to work with those guys. Then, when you hit about 50 people or so, typically in company life cycle, something changes from 0 to 50 of 1 to 50. Management by let's go and have a beer works really well. Management by walking around, yes, that's your thing. It's easy to keep track. Everyone knows each other and they communicate well and things play out. After 50, something happens. Just in my personal opinion, from 50 to 100 people, then you're getting to the point where, hey, we need to start to have real organization. We need to start to have guidelines, processes, policies in order to treat our people right. There's more people managing people, and that means that there's possibility of people making mistakes. It increases and so on. So really, when you do hit the growth phase after 50 or so, and from that point onwards, then board work has to be more professional. It has to reflect that. With Remedy, when the company was around 50 people, one of the persons we were able to attract to our board was Christian Fredriksson, the CEO of F-Secure. And one of the reasons we wanted to have Christian with us was the fact that he was managing an organization of 1,000 people with about 100 different offices around the world. And the insight and know-how that he brought into how do we manage growth was just tremendous. And these people, people with that kind of experience, they come to the board meetings, they go, well, let's go through HR compensation, all these things, and then they go, well, check, that's not right, fix this, guys. And it really helps a lot. Not just the CEO, but the whole management team benefits from that. And finally, the last thing, after 100 people, then it's a very different game again. After you grow from 0 to 50, it feels like there's certain rules that apply. From 100 people onwards, then in order to really treat your people fairly, you need to have processes in place and you need to remove. You're not looking at the individuals anymore after that point onwards. Really, what you're looking for is job descriptions and whether this candidate X, Y, and Z fills those job descriptions. And it has to turn into a little less personal way of managing the company. It's quite a different ball game. If you try to manage things on an individual base, then there's a lot of legacy issues. Well, this guy is working as a vice president in our company, but he's not really filling the shoes that well, but he's always done that, and we know he's a good guy, and he helped us 5 years back when we were launching product X, Y, and Z, and so on. So really, from 100 people onwards, it's very different from a management point of view. That again, from a board of directors point of view, has to be reflected there, and really it's more about the macro level focus and high level plans, and probably more about financing and the related issues than what are you're not as close to the product anymore at that point in the board. Again, the industry figureheads will be nice. At Remedy, we got Mike Capps, the CEO of Epic, who sold Epic to Tencent with $700 million. Mike's an awesome figurehead, and having that kind of talent opens up a lot of doors, opens up a lot of possibilities that would not otherwise be possible. So really, from 100 people onwards, you're looking for A-class players that have very, very high-level connections and can help there. So that was a quick overview of what are the responsibilities of the board. Any questions at the end?